I am Evelyn Marcus, and in addition to being a psychologist, I'm featured in the documentary Never Again Is Now. I am a Dutch Jew and the daughter of Holocaust survivors. In 2006, I immigrated to the US because of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe.
I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller, founder of the free nonfiction Holocaust theater project Thin Edge of the Wedge. Grew up in a small town in the Midwest, two American Jews whose parents had immigrated at the turn of the 20th century from Latvia and Russia. In 1970, my U.S. Army officer husband and I were stationed in Munich, Germany, only 25 years after the end of World War II.
Our guest for this episode is Nikki Veltkamp, who will tell us a little bit more about herself. Nikki, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you guys for having me. My name's Nikki. I am 21 years old. I am originally from Amsterdam, Netherlands, which is a teeny tiny country in Europe. And I grew up there until the age of 12. And then I actually moved to Los Angeles, California, and I lived here for about 7 years. So I did all of my middle school and high school here. And then I actually went back to Amsterdam, and I am currently studying there at the University of Amsterdam. I'm doing a program that's called PPLE, which is an interdisciplinary program standing on 4 different disciplines: politics, psychology, law, and economics. And I'm a major in political science. So that's me.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you for being on our show. It's an honor to have you on. Um, and I heard that you have recently come across some anti Semitism yourself as a student, as a Jewish student at the University of Amsterdam. Could you tell us what happens, please?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Jewish. I forgot to say that, but I'm Jewish, and my great grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And yeah, so I'm studying at the University of Amsterdam, and the past year, and I would say specifically the past few months, was the first time that I ever witnessed direct anti-Semitism. And with direct, I mean it wasn't necessarily directed towards me, but I saw it in front of my eyes. It was very tangible. And what I can really tell you is it really started in May, when the Israel-Palestine conflict really flared up again. And I think anyone who is on social media or watches the news was very aware of that. And that's also how I came to see the anti-Semitism that was present. Because a lot of my friends, and especially friends from the university, are very leftist. The University of Amsterdam is a very less leftist university, which I personally have no problem with. But you know, there were a lot of obvious opinions there going around, specifically on social media. And what I was really seeing is that there was a really one-sided view on the conflict, which I kind of expected also from the university. But with that came a lot of hatred and aggression towards Jews and towards Zionism. And what I specifically saw is, for example, a lot of infographics. So what was going on at the time, a lot of my friends from university and such were sharing infographics about the conflict that were explaining what the Israelis were supposedly doing. And also saying why it's not necessarily anti-Semitic to condemn them. But a lot of those infographics included cartoons and pictures trying to depict a conflict that to me were just blatant anti-Semitism. For example, there was one cartoon that was being shared by a lot of my friends, a lot of people from the university, where there was an IDF soldier, which is a soldier from the Israeli Defense Force, who was, you know, in the cartoon is shooting a Palestinian person or aiming at a Palestinian person with his gun. And he looks into this reflection on his side, and it's a reflection of a Nazi officer shooting a gun at a concentration camp prisoner. a Jewish concentration camp prisoner. So really making this comparison between the Jewish Israelis and Nazis during the Second World War. And that to me was just the biggest, that was kind of a turning point, I would say. That to me was really when I realized, like, oh, this is just my friends, these are my friends sharing blatant anti-Semitism, and these are people from the university standing for that. And that was really scary.
Yes, so there you saw criticism of Israel in your university environment, criticism of Israel spilling over towards Nazifying Israelis and Jews, basically. So that you thought now it becomes, then you thought now it becomes anti-Semitic, right?
Yeah, that was for me. There was other stuff already going on that I thought was questionable, but for me, that was really a turning point where I was like, okay, now, we're not, to me, we're not even talking. I mean, we are talking about the conflict, but to me, people were constantly saying, which I also thought was funny, that this had nothing to do with Judaism and it had nothing to do with religion. But it was so obvious that it did. It had so much to do with it. And the moment that I saw these comparisons being made to Nazis and stuff, that's when I thought, okay, this is not just talking about the conflict anymore. This is a bigger issue.
Yes. So depicting Israelis as Nazis is considered anti-Semitic by the definition that is used in the international community, the official definition, and it's not new. It's I've seen when I was still living in Holland. Holland is also my country of origin. When I was still living in Holland in 2002, I saw a cartoon winning an award, a newspaper cartoon winning an award where Israelis were also depicted as guards of Auschwitz, shooting the Palestinians.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Although Nikki spent her middle school and high school here in the United States, she was at college. I mean, she is at college with students who presumably many have spent their time, middle school and high school, in the Netherlands. Is Holocaust education mandatory? And what do you think these students who are now taking this far left, what have they learned about the Holocaust that you know of?
I know that, so the program that I do is an international program, which is good to note, I think. So it's not all Dutch students, but there are a lot of Dutch students there, and obviously at the university I interact with a lot of Dutch students. But it's still a lot of European students, so I still think it's relevant to answer this question. I know, from what I remember, also because I did go to elementary school there as well, the Holocaust is definitely addressed, and I mean, I know less about it here in the US, but I think I would say it's maybe more addressed and it's more of a bigger topic during your school time and during your education, and everyone is aware of it. And also in May, we have this Memorial Day, obviously, for the victims of the Holocaust and victims of the war. And that's always a pretty big deal in my eyes. So I think that gets addressed very much so in education. But I also think what's interesting from what I noticed and from what I know from my friends is that in the Dutch education, they address the Holocaust and they address what happened and all the atrocities that happened to the Jews. But it's seen as a thing in the past, which is, it makes sense. But something like anti-Semitism, it's not really addressed. It's seen as a thing from just during that time. It's seen as a thing from, oh, that's just the thing the Nazis did. We're past that. So I always thought that was interesting how they really address it in that way and see it as a thing of the past and of the Second World War, and how they don't really reflect on it in modern times. That's what I know.
Right. So you experienced it now in modern times. What did it do to you emotionally to see your friends retweet these kind of infographics?
Yeah, I mean, all I can be honest, and all I can say is it was really difficult. It was really emotionally draining. I mean, I think because of two things though. One of the things that was going on for me at this time is I'm Jewish, and I knew that there was something going on with me during this whole time, because it's an Israel-Palestine conflict, and I knew that there was a part of me that just didn't really know how to feel about this, and I hadn't made my mind about the conflict itself in the first place. So I was also trying to figure that out kind of still, and then this flared up, and then all my friends, all these people that I know from university and not, were taking a very clear side. We're taking a very clear stance that was very aggressive, and that seemed to not be friendly towards Jews. And that was really hard, mostly because it was frustrating. It was frustrating because I could tell that these people, that my friends, a lot of these people don't know what they're talking about. I can tell. They're not even aware that they're posting anti-Semitic things, and that's very frustrating. But it's also very sad and heartbreaking, because I do have a history. My great-grandparents were in the concentration camps. There's a lot of generational trauma in my family. And it's heartbreaking to see that people didn't even recognize that, or it felt like my friends didn't even recognize that.
Right. So they were accusing, if I remember well, they were accusing Israel of genocide and having experienced genocide in the family. That must have been a painful exaggeration to see your friends buy into, I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, that was also one of the things, is which you also can consider anti-Semitic, is the words that were being thrown around. And to me, I mean, in the first place, words are very powerful, and I think the political dialogue is one of the most powerful tools that there is, and that was being used the most. There were all these words being thrown around, like genocide and ethnic cleansing, apartheid, all of these very I would say politically loaded words, especially for someone who has a history with some of them. And that was maybe also the most heartbreaking, especially, yeah, because of what you said. Like, there's a history of that in my family, so it's very hard to hear your friends just throw those around.
Yeah. So, what was your reaction toward? Did you approach your friends? Did you do something? Did you stay silent, or did you speak up?
I initially, I think I would say I stayed silent, because I'd never really had that before, which is also why it was such a weird experience. But I was kind of paralyzed. I didn't really know what to do or say. And the thing is, it kept going, and it was building up for so long. This on social media is what I'm talking about, like all these posts, all the things that people were saying. It was only getting more aggressive, and it was only getting worse, and more people were joining that I knew. And that kind of paralyzed me. So initially I didn't do much. There are a couple of things that I ended up doing. The first thing I did is I did eventually post something on my Instagram. On my Instagram story, I said, and it really wasn't even like an opinion about the conflict or anything. All I said was, do your research. Don't just throw around words like genocide and ethnic cleansing. And don't repost every single plausible infographic that you see, like, do your research. That's really all I was saying. And that got some good reactions, and that got some bad reactions as well. But that was the first thing I did, and that felt like a very small yet big thing.
Yeah.
And the second thing I did was really just reaching out to my friends. The first thing I did was reaching out to my Jewish friends that I knew were most likely going through the same thing, and really just connecting and kind of, just discussing how we were feeling and being vulnerable with one another. And that was really helpful, because that was really just more of a rant about how we were feeling. But that
they did experience the same thing.
Yeah, so I mostly talked to friends, Jewish friends from the University of Amsterdam, and we're a very small group, at least in my program, and they were experiencing the exact, if not more, things like this.
Okay.
And that was, I mean, that was heartbreaking, but also comforting to know, right? So I was not alone.
Yeah.
And it gave me strength to talk to them, and it gave us strength, I think, to talk to one another and realize that this was going on, and that we were all kind of experiencing this. But that also gave me the strength to kind of reach out to friends beyond that and friends that weren't Jewish. Some of those friends were also posting these anti-Semitic things or posting things about the conflict, and some friends weren't. And I reached out to some of them when I felt comfortable, not even to say like, oh, this is what you are doing, or this is when you shared something anti-Semitic, but really just to have a conversation. And that was really wonderful. That was really amazing. One thing that really appalled me was just how I would say 9 out of 10 people didn't know what they were talking about, which is what I expected. They didn't realize that they were sharing anti-Semitic content. They don't know what anti-Semitism is, which shocked me because we are in Europe and these were Dutch people mostly, that should have gotten the education and that should have known, but they didn't. So that was really shocking. But it was also really good because I realized how powerful it was just to have that conversation. So those were some of the things that I initially did.
That's amazing, Nikki. I commend you for that. I so much understand that you felt paralyzed at first, seeing your friends posting anti-Semitic criticism of Israel, and using words like genocide and ethnic cleansing and apartheid and all that, without knowing the facts. And then getting over your paralysis, talking with your Jewish peers in university, feeling empowered, empowering each other by that, and then reaching out to your non-Jewish peers and friends, some of them who were posting those anti-Semitic things, and starting a conversation, not so much giving them hell, but starting a conversation about, do you realize what you are posting here, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
one, go ahead. I was just going to say that's one of the reasons that Evelyn and I started this podcast, is that we realize that many people don't realize what anti-Semitism is. And so that step of just having a conversation is so important so that they begin to understand what they're saying.
Nikki, did you explain to them what was anti-Semitic about their posts?
Yes, not to everyone, because the conversation often went more into the fact that they didn't know what they were talking about in the conflict, and that they were just simply seeing things on Instagram being posted by celebrities, and such, and they were just like, okay, well, these are the facts of the conflict. So that's what I talked about with most of them. But with some of them, I got the question, of like, okay, well, why is it anti-Semitic? When is it anti-Semitic? And that was also difficult for me because I did try to explain them from my perspective, what I perceived to be anti-Semitic. And but it was also difficult at times because I could tell, which to me points to another problem, that they didn't know. They weren't educated on it. So they had a really hard time understanding why it's anti-Semitic and why it's related to it in the first place. Because that's one of the other things that I was seeing so many people post, was saying that the conflict had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And that really annoyed me as well, because I was like, these are non-Jewish people, non-Jewish friends of mine that were telling me what's anti-Semitic and what's not anti-Semitic. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry. But so that was really difficult to have that conversation, but I could tell that it got those people thinking. And I hope that now, they pay more attention to it and that they do their research into it. And I also gave them some sources. I would sometimes say, okay, well, you can read this book, or here's an article that you can read as well. That's usually really helpful.
How did they react to that in that conversation?
You mean when we were talking about anti-Semitism?
Yeah. And when you were telling them that you considered it to be anti-Semitic what they had
Mm.
posted, and that you discussed the conflict. How was the atmosphere in that conversation? How did they react to you?
Um, most almost all the conversations I had that were like that, which weren't even that many, but the conversations that I did have were, they felt terrible, you know? They had no idea. They felt like, you know, the first reaction that you get, which you also tend to get a lot with when it comes to racism, is people saying, well, I'm not a racist. I'm not anti-Semitic. I don't hate Jews. You know, that's the first thing that they say. So they were often shocked and they were appalled by if I, you know, shed a light onto it and I told them a little bit about what they were actually doing. Most of the time these people were shocked and they were sad and they even apologized to me, which also for me was weird because I was like, well, I mean, it's fine, you know, but they felt sorry and they felt guilty for what they did. So that was always heartbreaking, but also beautiful, because it's a moment where those people kind of realize like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this.
And what do you think the effect will be of you approaching them?
I think I have two things. I have what I think the effect will be, and I have what I hope the effect will be.
Mhm.
I think the effect will be that, from what I know, is that some of them said that they would, you know, they stopped posting and they deleted the post that they shared.
Great.
So that was a good thing. They said, okay, well, I'm not just going to blindly post about this topic.
Great.
So that, I think that's a direct effect that it had on some of them. I also think, which I was happy about, that they would reach out to me more, because that was one of the things that I was lacking, which I don't blame them for. But they told me like, okay, well, next time something like this
I'm here.
happens, or
I don't. I don't hear.
It's
I
okay.
don't
you
hear you.
cannot hear me.
I can hear.
She can hear me.
Yes.
I
Can
have a
you hear me?
technical problem here.
Nikki, go ahead because I can hear you. So it means it's okay. Well, Evelyn,
Yeah, now she's gone. Okay, should I keep going?
yes, keep going.
Sorry, I lost my thought for a second.
That they would reach out and ask you, which is
Yes.
very important.
Yeah, so one of the things that I hoped for, which I think also happened, is that they would reach out to me next time, when they don't know about, when the conflict flares up again, or something, when something anti-Semitic happens, and that they can ask me, you know, what does it mean? Why is this bad? So that was one of the things. Is she back?
I think so.
I'm back.
And
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
I'm
let
back.
me ask my
Sorry.
question now, and then but I actually have a follow-up question. Because of my work with the Holocaust, I would like to know when you, as the great-grandchild of Holocaust survivors, do you remember when you first learned about the Holocaust? Did you talk about it in your family, or did you not talk about it?
Oh, the first time, I have to be honest, and I say I don't know, but I think that's because it was discussed in our family and it was something that we talked about. There wasn't like a moment where my parents sat me down and were like, oh, this is what happened. It was kind of something that I always knew as a child. But funny enough, and that's kind of just my own personal story, but for a long time I didn't really see the direct connection between, I knew that my great grandparents had gone through something terrible and that they were, you know, they went through an atrocity during the Second World War. But it was only until later, maybe around the age of 10, 11, 12, when I started to realize that there was a connection to being Jewish and that happening. That kind of came later. It wasn't really something that my parents, I think, emphasized. I did know I was Jewish as a child, as a child, but it wasn't, that connection to me for some reason wasn't like the big thing. It was more like, oh, my great grandparents went through something terrible during the war. And then later on, when I was growing up, that's when I started to realize, oh, this has to do with, you know, them being Jewish and such. But it's also because you grow up and you start to read more on your own. And I went to the Anne Frank house, which is in Amsterdam. So you start to educate yourself more. But it was something that was discussed during my childhood.
And how did that make you feel? I mean, did you feel different from your other classmates who hadn't had that experience? Because remember, a lot of uh, Dutch people were also in prison, not as Jews, but for other reasons. So one didn't just have to be Jewish to have grandparents or great parents who had suffered.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, there were similar stories, like as you're explaining, like I mean, my great grandparents weren't the only ones that had experienced that. Um, I do know I did feel different in the sense of, I think when I started to become aware of the Jewish thing, that's when I started to feel different. I was like, oh, but this has to do with like my identity in the end as well. That's when I like became aware of that. So it was really when I started to see this connection as a young child between being Jewish and, you know, being killed, murdered, imprisoned. That's when I started to realize, oh, this is something that sets me apart from other people around me.
So to kind of come back, because we're nearing the end of the interview, how do you feel today teaching what anti-Semitism is can be done? I mean, that's really what is needed, is to educate people so that they understand what they're saying and passing on without thinking. So from your experiences, what can we extrapolate that might help others?
Oh, that's such a good
And
question.
Nikki, yeah, and Nikki, maybe also if you could tell us something about your next step, because that's in line with this question, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I was going to mention that. So basically, and I was really inspired by the what I just explained, the small conversations that I had with people, whether Jewish or not, you know, but especially non-Jewish, is when I realized, oh, it's so important to have these conversations. So what I did with my mom, actually, who's Jewish, we kind of set up these meetings. We started doing this in June, where we first invited more Jewish people, because these were people that we knew were experiencing the same thing. So we wanted to have a dialogue about that. But we started to have more of these meetings and include people that were not Jewish, that had different opinions, that didn't know what anti-Semitism was, maybe. And we noticed that is what you need to do. You need to have a conversation with these people, like I was doing with my friends one-on-one. It's also good to do that in a bigger environment, to do that with more people. um my mom and I, we really noticed that that made such a huge impact. It got people thinking, it got people to be aware of what they were sharing, what they were reading. So, and we're going to do more of these meetings, and I want to invite my friends to them as well, and I want to invite people from the university that I know to them as well, to really have a conversation about it, because that's where it starts. So that's also my one big thing I would say, is really to have kind of a diverse conversation. And with diverse, I mean not just having people that know about the Holocaust or that know what anti-Semitism is, but really including those people that don't know, and that, they're not educated on anti-Semitism. And from there on, I think most people will usually be inspired, or something will be triggered in them that they can at least be aware of it, or that they can start educating themselves.
So how did
So
you invite these people? And was it remote, in person? And is there a link that we can share if people want to get in touch with you? We'll put it at the bottom of on the YouTube channel if there's a way. But
yeah,
start this.
well, for sure. So so as I said, the first meeting that we really had was more of a smaller one, and it really included friends of my mom and friends of mine as well, that were Jewish and that we knew were struggling during this time as well with the same thing that I have just explained, like the anti-Semitism that was going around on social media.
What did you say to them? In other words, what's the invite?
When I was inviting them,
Yes.
my mom and I really said to them, because I think it all started out with individual conversations that we had with these people. And then my mom and I set up one big invitation saying, okay, well, we know you guys we've talked to you individually, and know you guys have struggled with what's been going on lately, the rise of anti-Semitism. We would like to have a joint conversation about this to see what we could possibly do. And that's what we said. And that's what a lot of people loved and were willing to join in. And I think, that's different from when you're approaching people that are not Jewish or don't know about anti-Semitism. You have to approach them in a different way.
How?
Yeah, I would say I would bring it more as, that's what I've been doing at least, is bringing it more as a conversation about what anti-Semitism is. So not necessarily talking about, okay, this is the anti-Semitism that we've experienced, or this is what's anti-Semitic about the Israel-Palestinian dialogue about the conflict, but really more about like, okay, what is anti-Semitism? Have you recognized it as a non-Jewish person? Have you not? Have you been educated about it? Those are the conversations that I realize that people are very open to join in on, because then they can also, tell their own experience and relate to it more, rather than just us sitting down and being like, okay, well, this is what's anti-Semitic, this is what's wrong, because people don't like that, and that doesn't work.
So you invite these people by saying, we would like to have a conversation about anti-Semitism, what it is not. Would you be willing to join without referring to the rising anti-Semitism? Is that correct?
It's not, yeah, I mean, it is something that we mention, that we say anti-Semitism is something that's present.
Okay.
It's something that's happening, or that's at least how I've said it to my friends. And then I've said, well, would you like to have a conversation about what anti-Semitism is and what you think it is?
Great.
That's what we do.
Great. So you made it like relevant for today by saying it's recently has been rising. Would you want to think along about what it is? And
yeah, well, I mean, I think once again, the important question, what I've noticed is always like, okay, what do you think anti-Semitism is? Like, what have you learned about it? And then often people don't know, or they think it's, like I said, it's something from the past. And that will usually trigger them to want to have a conversation about it and to want to learn more. Because yeah, when you tell them like, oh, anti-Semitism is a thing today, they're like, oh, really? I had no idea.
Okay.
I hope that our listeners will learn from your ideas and spread your movement. I think it's brilliant. It's exactly what Evelyn and I are hoping, that we have to start at a very basic level. But the part I really like, before I thank you and end the show, is that you're saying to them, you're not saying this is what it is. You're encouraging people to say what they think it is, and then having a conversation that's so. I know Evelyn's a psychologist, and I'm just saying that she and I have talked about this. What you're doing is fabulous. You're only 21. We can't thank you enough. Wish we could clone you for thousands of other university students, Nikki. And so thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Thank you for people for listening. Please, those of you who haven't yet seen the wonderful documentary, Never Again Is Now, watch it. You can see it at joinneveragainisnow.com. or .org, right? And
.com.
And you can look up my nonfiction Holocaust theater project at thinedgethewedge.com. And wherever you are, without getting into physical danger, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you so much for having me.